What's up, guys? Welcome to another one. So I wanted to do a quick video here on the VCORE 97 Pro. I was thinking about titling the video "A Racket I Regret Selling." Maybe that is the actual title, we'll see. But I wanted to talk about this racket a little bit more because I feel like I sold it prematurely, which is one of the reasons I got it again. Initially I bought it, and this one's just a demo. The original reason I bought it is because generally I find the demo experience to not be so great a lot of the times unless you can actually put your own strings at your own tension in them, and you probably need more time to really get to know the racket than a lot of the demo programs actually allow you to have. So generally I just buy the racket. If I can, I'll look used and I can sell it used, that way I don't lose so much money. But the VCORE 97 just came out at the time, so I mean, I kind of ate a little bit of a loss on the cost. But I also wanted to extend the racket, which I did with my XDP butt cap thing that I do sometimes, so I could really get to know it as a 27.5 version of itself. So anyway, that's the perspective from which I am coming from with this revisited video. So there's a few things that I said in my original video that I kind of want to either refine, or maybe I would actually kind of take back and say something a little bit different now that I know the racket even better. So what I did I would describe as like a palate cleanse. This was sort of the last racket I had, which was kind of put me in a mindset of like, I need to sell everything and sort of start over fresh. And at the time, this was the only 16 by 19 I really gave a shot. And I was so 18 by 20 at the time, or 16 by 20. So I felt that some of the things that I didn't like about this racket really had to do with the string pattern. And that may or may not have had some legitimacy to it, but I wanted to revisit some of those things specifically, just so I could make a more accurate, I would say, impression for this racket for you guys to decide whether or not you guys want to try it or possibly buy it. For my future videos, by the way, I do plan to actually have like a format where I will break down different categories of a racket. I'll talk about the characteristics such as like power, spin, comfort, feel, etc. A lot of that kind of things, just to make the video more comprehensive and concise, and that way you guys can always look forward to hearing certain and specific details about a racket from my perspective. And I'll probably also put a couple of things in there that a lot of the other channels might not talk about or really go into detail much about, so you can also come to me for that kind of information on these rackets. But for now, I'm going to kind of do my standard get it all out of my head at once style. But again, I don't have too much I wanted to say outside of what I've already said, except for that I tried it again and I have a couple of different points now. So what are my favorite things about this racket? My favorite things are, honestly, I kind of love the color. I always prefer a racket to be matte as opposed to gloss. That way it just sort of feels better on your skin, in my opinion. It's not generally as durable of a paint job, but it'll never show your thumbprints. And, you know, if you're not throwing your racket all over the place, I don't see why you get it really scratched up anyway. I take pretty good care of my equipment unless my temper determines to do something else with my racket, which it has occasionally. I've never broken a racket, but I've definitely kind of just like, you know, and let it hit the ground or something. But yeah, if you take good care of a matte finish or a satin finish racket, the paint job should hold up just fine. Superficial details aside though, I think that this is definitely one of the more control-oriented 16 by 19s out there. It's a 97, so it's not a huge head size. It's got a relatively thin beam, and the comfort on this racket is ridiculous. I think it's a supremely comfortable racket, especially for how powerful it is. Now, one of the things that I said originally in my video was that the racket I decided was too powerful. I don't feel that way anymore. So one racket that I actually want to bring into compare this with a little bit, just so that there's more of a perspective, I would say that the VCORE 95, actually you can get more power at the top end with the 95 than you can with the 97. That's been my experience, at least. I feel like if you're hitting maybe not quite as hard at your max power as I am, then you might feel like the VCORE 97 is getting more power. But I feel like if you hit past that point, if you hit beyond that point, you'll see that the VCORE 95 still has some power left to return. Whereas this one it's gone. Like there's only a certain amount that you can get from hitting so much harder, whereas this one will still continue to return more power for how much harder you hit it. That's been my experience. But I also feel like that this racket generates power more easily initially. It's just that the harder and harder you hit, the more you'll start to notice that you aren't getting as much power back for how hard you're swinging. Whereas the power return on this racket feels more linear. In a way, that's kind of nice, but I also feel that the VCORE 97 is a much more comfortable racket. Not to say that this is uncomfortable, but if you put some thick gauge strings in here and you string it anything above, like, honestly, like 48, it's a very uncomfortable racket. So it's strange. I know it's a 95, but there's other things going on with this racket that make it seem like you really want to string this below like 45 with nothing bigger than 17 gauge strings. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend anything bigger than that for this racket. Easy to make this racket feel absolutely terrible, but this racket, I would also just say that it is a lot harder to generate power. This one is easier to generate power, but again, the harder you hit with this, the more it'll continue to give you back power, and the more you'll start to maybe notice that you run out of power with this one. But again, that's only at like the highest, hardest end of your hitting if you do actually hit that hard. I think one of the biggest things that I missed about this racket, and that made me think maybe I sold it too quickly, was the idea that, I mean, honestly, this racket is so comfortable and so plush that it was hard for me to believe the way in which it played for how comfortable it felt. Like, I've really never felt a racket with this sensation and playstyle combination, I guess. I can get great spin with this racket. I know it's not necessarily marketed as a spin racket, but the string pattern is relatively open, and the way that the racket just wants to move through the ball, you can get a lot of spin. And I think it's a relatively maneuverable racket. I think the swing weight is 318, the VCORE 95 is 316, but it's not a hard racket to maneuver. I mean, those 2 points are very small in the swing weight difference, so a lot of people wouldn't even notice that. And there's something that just feels so precise about this racket too, especially at the net. I really do feel like I get a lot of stability and a lot of precision, both with the depth of where I'm placing the ball, but also the angle. Maybe I just meshed with this racket really well, but I mean, some of the volleys and drop shots that I hit were just ridiculous. Like, consistently just, I'm able to really control the depth of the ball well, especially when it comes to the closer end of the net, like on their side of the court, really giving them a nasty, difficult drop shot. I could put a lot of spin on it. I can take a lot of power back. Like, somebody could blast it at me. I can just put my racket there gently, and the ball will just barely go over the net if that's what I wanted to do. Whereas a lot of other rackets, it's hard to get your racket there and actually not send it back to them with a little too much height, or it's too deep and maybe it's not such a great drop shot. You get punished for it real bad. Anytime that I felt I wanted to force the player to come to the net, or to, you know, basically give them a drop shot that they couldn't get to in time, I felt extremely confident with this racket. On the opposite end of that, I did feel like it was really hard to push players back. It was so much effort to really push players back and then kind of, you know, respond with their response with a drop shot. So push them all the way back, they get the ball back, and then I give them a really good drop shot. I feel really comfortable on the drop shots and playing with that short part of the court, but pushing them way back, it's a real struggle. And also when I get into a defensive position, I don't necessarily feel like I can attack my way out of that as confidently. Maybe if I have a really good angle or a good opening, maybe I can go for that. But a lot of the times I just felt like maybe going for an overhead, if I could do that at the time, was maybe the smarter, safer option, just because I don't have the confidence necessarily to rip a ball past them. So I did feel held back a little bit in that regard. But I feel like this racket kind of makes up for that if you're able to develop a play style where you maybe rely on angles a little bit more than you rely on depth. Because when you have a player out wide and you have all this court where you can go for a kill, you can go for like a deep, really fast ball that they're not going to get to, or you can go for a ball that's a little bit more shallow, but the angle is more extreme. So in a way, it's going to be equally hard for them to get to those balls. And I think this racket just specializes a little bit more in getting more precise and extreme angles, as opposed to really ripping it past them. Now, in that regard, I'm not going to say that this is some really high control-oriented racket that doesn't give you much power. It's very well-rounded in that way. I think it's actually like, it's a good control racket that's extremely comfortable, but it still has a surprising amount of power for that kind of racket, and you get a lot of spin with this. So honestly, it's hard to say that you're going to feel like you don't get enough power with this. I think that, honestly, I feel like I get enough power with this, but I can tell that when I hit my hardest balls, I'm not getting as much power as I want to get. There are some balls that I just want to absolutely murder. You know, like somebody gives me a nice ball way up here and I can get one of those high forehands where it's kind of between like a forehand and an overhead, and I can just pound those. And this racket does not reward me as much on those kinds of shots as some other rackets might, even the VCORE 95. And I really miss having that in my arsenal. But this racket does give me extreme confidence on certain angles and a lot of drop shots and drop volleys, and I'm going to miss that too. So it's a hard compromise to have to live with, but I feel like for my play style and the way that I want to play tennis, I think it's better for me if I have those kill points just that I know that I can go for that. And it's also just more fun for me to play like that and play like that confidently. So that's probably the kind of racket that I'm going for. But I just wanted to make it clear, I really do love this racket. There's a reason that I missed it. And there's a reason that I sold it kind of prematurely. I was going through a pretty intense racket black hole, if you will, you know? And that's not to discredit anything I said in any of my other videos. I think I was pretty clear about some of my perspectives on some rackets being kind of corrupted, I would say, from that E-Zone 98 that I had, the E-Zone 98 Plus. And the thing about the E-Zone 98 Plus is that that racket was so powerful. I spent so much time and experimenting towards taking some of that power out of the rackets, which meant going to thicker gauge strings and stringing higher and just getting like super low powered strings, like really dead strings, and still ultimately deciding I don't like that racket. But a lot of that thick string and dead string stuff would translate to other rackets, and I think it kind of messed with my experience or so. At least that thought got in my head, and now I'm going back and revisiting a couple of the rackets and having a more in-depth perspective on them too. So that's ultimately what I'm sharing with you guys. So those are my thoughts on the VCORE 97 Pro 310. And I love this racket. It's super comfortable. If you like a comfortable racket that gives you a lot of spin and good control and good stability, and you can play with the depth of the court a lot, like really confidently on the drop shots and stuff, this is a super fun racket to try. And I couldn't recommend it more than anything, really. I think if that category of things that this racket shines in sounds nice for you, then you got to try the VCORE 97 Pro. I think the only drawback is that maximum power limit that I feel like that is just gone for me. It's just gone. I'm never getting it back. I can't hit any harder. And the racket is just not going to give me that power at the top end of my power game. So that might not be relevant for you, or that might be a compromise that you're willing to live with. See, and that's kind of where I was at with it. But it just kind of required me to maybe change the shots that I would go for in certain situations. But yeah, it's not a weak racket and it's not a super powerful racket. And I think for a lot of people, that's really good. But yeah, I think the contact on the volleys, I haven't really felt a racket that felt this nice in a long time, and possibly ever. I can't think back to a racket that really felt better on the volleys than this one. And I've tried quite a few. You know that. I've tried more than I've shown on all my videos, of course. But yeah, this is just great. And it's great on the backhand slice as well. The way that this racket just kind of knifes through the ball. It's very, very nice. So there's a lot of things I'm going to miss about this racket, but I ultimately just don't think it's the best for me. But yeah, it's hard to say no. But I think I've come to a conclusion that makes sense to me on this racket, and it was a really good time. So yeah, that's my video on the VCORE Pro 97. If you guys want to see another video maybe where I compare it more closely to the VCORE 95, I know I brought that in. I featured the VCORE 95 a little bit just to, you know, provide a little perspective on this racket, but I'm also going to do a video on the VCORE 95. So stay tuned for that. You guys can like and subscribe if you appreciate the content, want to help the channel, and I will see you guys in a future video. All right, take care.